On the train platform covered by a thin layer of snow, a train from the south had just come to a stop, carrying with it passengers and their dreams. Among the crowd stepped down Naola, an Apache widow, wrapped in a worn-out cloak. Her deep black eyes sparkled with hope after a long journey. Here, she had been invited by a white family to become a mail-order bride, a chance to start over after so much loss. But that hope vanished in just a few cold words. The Stonefield family stood waiting at the platform, looked her over from head to toe, then turned their backs. "We do not want someone like you. Too old. You probably cannot have children." Their words landed like a knife. Around her, whispers began to rise. An Indian. She must be desperate. Nobody needs a widow anymore. Naola stood frozen, her luggage scattered at her feet, snow slowly gathering at the hem of her dress. Every gaze around her was cold. From the far corner of the platform, Samuel Carter, a widowed rancher living alone on the outskirts of town, had been watching the scene unfold. What he saw in her eyes was not just shame, but a fierce and quiet strength. Samuel stepped forward, placed his old wool coat over her shoulders, and spoke slowly. "It gets pretty cold around here. If you have not figured out where to go yet, my ranch always has a porch you can rest under." Samuel's ranch was poor and lonely. The fences leaned crookedly. The horse stable was nearly empty, with only a few sick horses trembling in the dark. Inside the old wooden house, the scent of fireplace smoke mixed with the smell of rotting wood, creating that familiar fragrance of solitude. "The room at the end of the hallway is still empty," Samuel said as he led her inside. "It is not much, but at least it has a roof and a fireplace." That evening, snow began to fall heavier on the dirt road leading away from the train station. Naola was still standing silently on the wooden steps, not knowing where to go. Once the crowd had completely dispersed, Samuel Carter returned, holding the wool coat he had just placed on her shoulders. "My ranch is not far from here," he said softly, his eyes showing not pity, but something closer to respect. "If you do not have a place to stay, then for now, it can be home." Naola stayed quiet for a few seconds. She had been cast out by white folks before, and even rejected by her own tribe. Her pride was long weathered. But the way this man looked at her was unlike anyone else. He did not see her as a burden, or as someone to feel sorry for. He saw her as a person. She nodded. And so, under a gray sky, the two of them rode together on horseback toward the edge of town to a small, forgotten ranch tucked into the wide-open prairie. The days that followed passed slowly, as if time itself moved more gently at the Carter Ranch than it did in the rest of the world. The lives of two people, who had once been cast aside, began to intertwine through seemingly small actions, but it was those very small things that quietly laid the foundation for a deep and lasting bond. Each morning, when the first rays of sunlight slipped through the window, Naola was already up, tending the fire and cooking a warm pot of corn porridge. She never said thank you when Samuel left a cup of warm milk outside her door, as he did every day, but she poured it into a bowl and drank every last drop. Samuel never asked why his house was getting cleaner, why the chairs were neatly arranged, or why the stables were being cleared out regularly, but he knew someone was silently stitching back together the broken pieces of a life he had long abandoned. In the afternoons, they worked together by the fence. Samuel taught Naola how to check horse hooves and treat skin wounds. In return, she shared small tricks the Apache used to heal livestock with wild herbs. As the sun set, they would sit side by side on the wooden porch, watching the red clouds drift across the sky in silence. No words were needed. The quiet between them felt warmer than any long-winded conversation ever could. One evening, as the prairie turned golden under the light of the setting sun, Naola opened up for the first time about her past. She spoke of her Apache husband, who had fallen in battle defending their village from a group of mercenaries, and how the tribe had blamed her as a curse, casting her out like some bearer of misfortune. Samuel said nothing for a long while, then spoke of his wife and daughter, who had died in a snowstorm years ago, and the helplessness he felt when his own hands could not hold on to them. In that moment, they were no longer strangers. They were two souls carrying the same scar, two hearts that had once shattered, now finding each other through quiet understanding. That night, Samuel added an extra log to the fireplace and stayed a little longer than usual. And Naola, for the first time in many years, no longer flinched at the sound of wind howling outside the window. In the stillness of the western night, something was slowly beginning to change gently, but in a way that could never be undone. Winter crept into the borderlands, slowly and coldly. By the time the first layer of snow covered the roof of the horse stable, the bond between Samuel and Neola had become more than simple. Understanding it was slowly turning into something deeper. But just as their hearts began to open, the outside world closed in tighter than ever. Rumors spread across Denton Hollow like wildfire in the wind. An Indian woman is living with a widowed rancher. She is clinging to his land just for a place to stay. A savage pretending to be a proper wife. Every time Neola went into town to buy cornmeal or salt, hateful eyes stabbed into her back like knives. Some people spat on the ground as she passed. Children threw stones and called her a savage. The pressure grew heavier when an invitation arrived at the ranch. The sender was Agnes Whitlock, the mayor's wife, a powerful woman infamous for her arrogance. In the letter, she invited Neola to a ladies' afternoon tea at the mayor's mansion. Samuel understood the meaning behind it immediately. It was not an honor, but a test disguised as courtesy. On the day of the gathering, Neola wore the simplest dress she owned. The moment she stepped into the lavish room, the whispers started. Agnes smiled sweetly, but every question she asked cut like a blade. Can your tribe even red? Do you plan to have mixed blood children? Do you truly believe someone like you can own land here? Each mocking word pressed heavier against Neola's chest. She tried to remain composed, but with every passing minute, her dignity felt more and more suffocated. As she left, the cold wind burned against her face, and she knew she was fighting not just the prejudice of an entire town, but also the deepest fear within her, the fear that her presence would cause Samuel to be despised just as she was. That night, when Samuel returned home after a long day in the stables, he found Neola standing silently by the fireplace, her gaze distant. She said nothing about the tea, nothing about the cruel words, but Samuel could feel the invisible distance growing between them, a distance neither of them had built, but one the world itself had placed there. And deep inside Neola's heart, a terrifying thought began to form, one she could not push away. Perhaps leaving was the only way to save him from sharing her shame. Thank you so much for being here. If this story brought back memories of dusty afternoons and the sound of hooves echoing in your heart, consider subscribing to my channel so that every day we can sit together once more, and I will tell you another story from the Wild West. The days following the afternoon tea grew strangely quiet. Neola still did everything as she always did, tending the fire, cleaning the stables, laying herbs out to dry under the sunday. Samuel still left a cup of warm milk outside her door each morning. But between them now lay an invisible space, a silence not born from comfort, but from the fear of speaking the thoughts their hearts were both holding back. For Neola, every contemptuous glance in town was like a blade cutting into old wounds. She remembered the day her own tribe had cast her out, the feeling of standing motionless among those who once called her sister, but now looked at her with nothing but hatred. She had thought this place would be different, that Samuel would not have to bear shame because of her. But now, she was no longer sure. One night, snow was falling thick and heavy under a pitch-black, moonless sky. Samuel came home late, after bringing the horses into the stable, and found Neola sitting in front of the fireplace, the flames casting a soft glow across her pensive face. "Is something wrong?" he asked quietly. She gave a faint smile. Nothing at all. But deep in her eyes, he knew she was hiding something. After Samuel went to bed, Neola stood silently for a long time beside the wooden table near the hearth. In her hands was a beaded Apache necklace, the only thing she had left from her late husband. She had once sworn to wear it until the day she died, as a way to keep his memory alive. But tonight, she removed it and placed it gently on the table. "Thank you for everything," she whispered into the darkness, even though Samuel was already fast asleep. "But you deserve a life unburdened by the weight of other people's contempt." Before dawn broke, Neola packed a small bag, wrapped herself in her cloak, and stepped outside. The freezing wind bit at her face, but she did not look back. Each footprint she left in the white snow felt like a piece of her heart being torn away. She knew that if she stayed, she would bring Samuel nothing but more whispers, more burdens he did not deserve to bear. Inside the house behind her, the fire still burned brightly in the hearth. and on the wooden table, the Apache necklace glimmered in the orange glow, not just a relic of the past, but an unspoken message. You have become a part of my heart. The sun had not fully risen when Naola left the ranch. The snow had stopped falling, leaving behind a vast, endless blanket of white. The old horse carried her silently along the narrow trail leading away from Denton Hollow, and in her chest, every heartbeat felt like a goodbye. She did not cry. She believed her tears had dried up long ago. When the sun crested over the horizon, she paused at the final ridge and looked back one last time at the place that had been her temporary home. The Carter Ranch was now just a tiny dot in a sea of snow. She turned away, but only minutes later, from that direction, a thick black column of smoke began to rise, followed by a surge of bright orange flames tearing through the cold gray sky. Naola's heart clenched. Without a second thought, she yanked the reins. The horse galloped down the snow-covered slope like the wind. The cold air lashed at her face, tears streamed down her cheeks, and in her mind, there was only one thought. Samuel was still inside. As she drew closer, the fire had already consumed the stable and was crawling across the porch of the main house. The wind whipped the flames into a howling frenzy. The panicked cries of horses rang out from within, mixed with a dry, rasping cough. Samuel! Without hesitation, Naola pulled her cloak over her head and charged straight into the blaze. The searing heat stole her breath. The thick smoke turned everything into shadow and ash. She shouted, her voice raw and cracked. Samuel, where are you? A cough answered from behind the stable. Samuel was collapsed near a wooden wall, a fallen beam pinning him down. She rushed over and, with all the strength she had, shoved the burning timber aside. Get up! We have to get out! She shouted, her voice filled with command. Samuel tried to stand, but his strength had failed him. She slung his arm over her shoulder and dragged him step by step toward the exit. Just a few yards from the door, the roof of the stable groaned and split open, crashing down as flames roared after them. With one final push, she hurled Samuel through the doorway just as the roof collapsed behind her. They tumbled into the thick snow outside. Coughing hard in the choking smoke, Samuel gasped for air, looking at the woman who had risked her life to come back for him. His eyes blurred, whether from smoke or tears. He could not tell. You came back for me? He whispered. Naola did not answer. She only gripped his hand tightly, her eyes trembling, but steady. And in that moment, surrounded by smoke and wind, the two of them understood. Everything they had tried to deny now had no place left to hide. They belonged to each other not because fate had written it that way, but because their hearts had chosen. The fire was finally put out after nearly an hour, leaving behind only a smoking heap of ash and the heavy scent of burnt wood lingering in the air. Samuel sat with his back against a scorched section of the fence, his shoulder loosely bandaged, breath still heavy. Naola sat beside him, her hands blackened and bleeding, but her eyes held a strange, quiet calm. They did not speak for a long time. Only the sound of wind sweeping across the prairie and the distant, scattered cries of frightened horses filled the silence. Finally, Samuel spoke. His voice hoarse, like someone waking from a dream. You came back, even though it could have killed you. Naola gave a faint smile, weary, but full of meaning. Because you were the only one who never turned your back on me. Those words pierced straight through the armor Samuel had worn around his heart for so many years. All that he had buried, the loss, the fear, the loneliness rose to the surface, mixing with the feeling he could no longer deny for the woman beside him. A few days later, when Samuel was able to walk again, Naola began packing her things. Though her heart wanted to stay, her mind kept whispering that love could not overcome the town's contempt. But this time, Samuel was not going to let her leave quietly. That morning, Denton Hollow stirred with a scene it had never witnessed. Right there at the train platform, the place where everything had begun, Samuel Carter, the quiet man who had always kept to himself, stood in front of the crowd. His coat still smelled of smoke, and in his hand was the beaded Apache necklace she had left behind. And in front of everyone, he reached for Naola's hand just as she was about to step onto the train. The first time I saw you here, he said, his voice cutting through the hush, I knew my life would change. I do not need a wife to cook or sweep. I do not need someone to keep my land or tend my horses. I need you, the one who gave this place meaning. The crowd murmured. There were looks of shock, others filled with disdain, but among them were a few softer gazes. As if, for the first time, they saw something in Samuel he had never shown before: love. Neola stood frozen. Every word he spoke broke through the walls she had built around her heart. The memories of rejection, the wounds of the past, they all seemed small compared to this one moment, the moment a man stood up against the world just to hold on to her. She looked down at the train ticket in her hand, then into Samuel's eyes. A single tear slipped down her cheek. She let go of the ticket and watched it drift away in the cold Wyoming wind. "I am staying," she whispered, placing her calloused hand gently over his. "Not out of gratitude, but because my heart needs you too." Spring came earlier than usual that year to the land of Denton Hollow. The snow and ice slowly melted from the hillsides, revealing rich brown soil and the first tender blades of new grass. A spring breeze swept across the wide prairie, carrying with it the scent of new life, and with it, deep and lasting changes at the Carter Ranch. Neola and Samuel stood side by side in front of a newly built stable. The ashes from last year's fire had been replaced by strong, fresh beams of wood. Inside, newborn foals clattered about, their hooves echoing alongside the laughter of two people who once believed they would live the rest of their lives in loneliness. Now, each day began with simple things, but things full of meaning. Samuel rose early, checking the fences and planting the first seeds for the new season. Neola set her basket of herbs out to dry in the sun and tended the chickens behind the barn. In the evening, they would sit together on the porch, sharing little stories of the past, of forgotten dreams, and of a future they were slowly building together. A few months later, the first cry of a child rang through the wooden house. Their daughter, a mixed-race child of the frontier, had her mother's deep, dark eyes and her father's warm smile. They named her Elena, which meant light, the very thing that had guided them through their darkest days. The town of Denton Hollow slowly began to change. The scornful looks that once followed Neola softened. Some people still whispered, but others began to nod in greeting when she walked through the market with her child. A few families even sent their children to the ranch to attend the little school Neola had opened for the frontier's youth. Acceptance did not come all at once, but they kept living, kept loving, and kept proving that prejudice could never outlast persistence. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Samuel sat on the porch, his daughter sleeping in his arms, and Neola rested her head gently on his shoulder. Together, they gazed across the fields where horses grazed beneath the crimson glow of sunset. "I once believed I would die alone out here," Samuel said softly, "and I once thought there would never be a place I could call home." Neola whispered in reply. They sat in silence for a long time. No more words were needed, because now, everything they had once lost had been replaced by something far greater. A home, a family, and a love born of pain, yet strong enough that nothing could ever break it. Dear friends, love does not come from a glance across a crowded room. It comes from two hearts that have weathered the storm and still choose to hold on to each other. It is not a magic that erases the past, but a strength that allows us to keep moving forward, to believe that even a heart once shattered can begin again. Here in the harsh West, where sandstorms and blood have swept away countless lives, there still burns a quiet flame, the flame of two hearts once broken, now found. It has been my deepest honor to share this story with you. I truly hope that no matter what life throws your way, you find happiness, peace, and the courage to keep going. Stay strong, my friends. I love every one of you, the incredible audience of Wild West storytelling. Let me know what this story meant to you. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Type the number 1 if you enjoyed this story. And do not forget to subscribe for more powerful tales from the Wild West.